Having lived in apartments throughout college and my early career, I understand that some sound is inevitable when sharing walls with others. But after landing my dream job as a developer at a major company, I decided it was time for an upgrade. I found this beautiful apartment in a quiet neighborhood with modern amenities and great soundproofing. Or so I thought. The first week was perfect. I could work from home in peace when needed, and my evening relaxation wasn't interrupted by the usual city chaos. Then my new neighbors moved in next door. At first, I tried to be understanding. Moving is stressful, and people often celebrate once they're settled in. But days turned into weeks, and their celebration never seemed to end. They didn't just play music, they played terrible music. The kind where the bass is so heavy it makes your windows rattle. I work in a high-stress environment where clear thinking is essential. One small coding mistake could cost the company thousands of dollars. So when their latest party started on a Wednesday night, I tried to be patient. By 11 p.m., with their music still blasting and drunk people screaming in their apartment, I'd had enough. I put on my robe, walked next door, and knocked. A guy with bloodshot eyes and a beer in his hand opened the door. I politely asked if they could turn down their music, explaining that I had work in the morning. The guy took a long sip of his beer and smirked, asking why that should be their problem. I explained that besides basic courtesy, there were actually quiet hours between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. on weekdays, and it was illegal to be this loud right now. A woman appeared behind him, swaying slightly. She mockingly asked if I was going to call the police over some music, saying that wouldn't be very neighborly. She suggested I mind my own business and stick to my own apartment. They shut the door in my face. Their bass-heavy music immediately got louder, and I heard laughter from inside. The party continued until 2 a.m. with people shouting, singing, and at one point what sounded like furniture being moved around. That's when I decided enough was enough. I called my boss and arranged to work from home the next day, citing some maintenance work that needed to be done in my apartment. He was cool with it. One of the perks of being a reliable employee. I set my alarm for 5:55 a.m. When it went off, I smiled, knowing my other neighbor would have already left for their early hospital shift. I spent the next 5 minutes setting up my professional-grade speaker system, a passion project I'd invested in during the pandemic. We're talking about an 800-watt system with separate subwoofers that could probably be heard from space. At exactly 6 a.m. I positioned the subwoofer against our shared wall and pulled up my special playlist. I started with some hardcore dubstep, the kind that makes your teeth rattle. The bass was so intense I had to put in earplugs to protect my own hearing. The walls weren't just vibrating, they were practically pulsing. 15 minutes in, my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my neighbors looking like death warmed over. The guy was holding his head, and the woman was squinting against the hallway light. She immediately demanded that I turn off what she called garbage, while the guy complained that people were trying to sleep. I gave them the same smirk they'd given me the night before and threw their own words back at them. I asked if they were really getting angry over a little music and suggested they stick to their apartment, just as they'd told me to do. I slammed the door and disconnected my doorbell. Then I switched to some industrial metal, followed by hardstyle and finally some aggressive psytrance. The bass drops were magnificent, and I could hear things falling off their walls. After a solid hour, I turned everything off. The sudden silence was almost deafening. I walked over to their door and rang their bell repeatedly until they answered. They looked absolutely miserable. I laid out my terms clearly. Since I worked in tech and could work from home whenever I wanted and had more speakers I hadn't even unpacked yet, we could either do this every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, or they could agree to respect the quiet hours between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. on weekdays. The woman started to speak, but the guy stopped her and agreed to keep it down after 10. I cheerfully wished them a wonderful day and suggested they might want to take some aspirin for their headaches. They've been surprisingly quiet ever since. I worked in a small-town police department where we typically had only 5-6 officers on duty at a time. My beat covered mostly rural areas and the county highway that runs through our little town. The job was usually pretty straightforward. mostly speed enforcement and routine patrols. That day started like any other. I was doing speed enforcement on the highway when dispatch radioed about a possible kidnapping in progress. The details described a female driver with short blonde hair in a specific make and model of car. When I checked the computer for more information, I found multiple people had called 911 reporting a young kid in the hatchback area holding a sign that read, "Help, I've been kidnapped. Call 911," with their hands appearing to be tied. The initial reports weren't in my area, so I continued my routine patrol. About 10 minutes later, dispatch crackled again. The vehicle was heading south on County Highway 123, right toward my position. Within minutes, 3 more calls came in from drivers reporting the same thing. The highway was flat enough that I could see for miles. Sure enough, I spotted the van matching the description. As it passed, I clearly saw the female driver and the kid in the hatchback area. Instead of immediately pursuing, I held back to avoid spooking the driver. In potential kidnapping situations, the last thing you want is a high-speed chase that puts the victim at risk. I radioed for backup and followed at a distance. Fortunately, there was a highway patrol barracks nearby, and 4 trooper vehicles joined the pursuit. We discussed our approach and decided on a full felony stop rather than a routine traffic stop. We spread across all 4 lanes, hit our lights, and activated our sirens. Instead of pulling over to the shoulder, the woman slammed on her brakes right in the middle of the highway. As soon as we got out with weapons drawn, she immediately started screaming that it was just a joke. We weren't interested in her explanations at that point. We had to treat it as a serious situation. I ordered her to exit the vehicle with her hands up and walk backward slowly. We secured the driver first, then the passenger, who turned out to be her 13-year-old daughter, followed by 4 more passengers from the back seats. 2 troopers cleared the vehicle while another trooper and I rescued the crying boy from the hatchback. The entire time, the woman and her daughter kept yelling that he was her son and that they couldn't believe we were taking it so seriously, insisting it was just a joke. After securing everyone in separate vehicles, we started investigating. A female trooper got the young boy calmed down with a stuffed dinosaur and some snacks. That's when we learned the truth. The mother and her teenage daughter had thought it would be funny to make a fake kidnapping sign and record other drivers' reactions. They'd been doing it all day across multiple jurisdictions. After consulting with the district attorney, we released the 4 teenagers in the back with no charges. The daughter received a juvenile citation for inducing panic. When I went to talk to the mother, she was already celebrating what she assumed would be a minor punishment. She asked me where she needed to sign the ticket. When I told her that it wasn't that simple and that she was being charged with several felonies, she completely lost it. She started screaming about how nobody could take a joke anymore and threatened to have her husband sue us for unlawful detention. I read her Miranda rights while she fake sobbed about it just being a joke. Her husband arrived to collect the kids and the vehicle, looking completely exhausted. He told us this wasn't the first time she'd done stupid stuff like this, admitting he had warned her it would end badly, but she never listened. She ended up being charged with 7 counts of inducing panic, 6 counts of felony child endangerment, 1 for each kid in the vehicle, and having an unrestrained child in the vehicle. The child endangerment charges were elevated to felonies because her prank forced us to conduct a felony stop, putting all the children at risk. During her court appearance, she tried to argue that we had overreacted, but the judge wasn't having any of it. Not only did she get convicted on all counts, but the judge also ordered her to pay restitution for the cost of the emergency response and required her to attend both parenting classes and counseling sessions. I heard her husband filed for divorce and got full custody of the kids. I've dealt with plenty of entitled people in my career, first as an EMT, then as a police officer, and now as a 911 dispatcher. But this one really took the cake. Putting your own kids at risk for social media views? That's a special kind of entitled. I used to work in shipping and receiving at a major grocery chain, and honestly, I was pretty good at dealing with difficult customers. Most of my co-workers couldn't stand the constant stream of entitled people wandering into our back area, but I had developed a thick skin over the years. Maybe it was because I actually enjoyed the work, organizing shipments, managing inventory, and keeping things running smoothly gave me a sense of satisfaction. One of my co-workers on the shipping team, I won't name names, had been there for about 6 years and absolutely hated every minute of it. The job had worn him down to the point where he could barely contain his anger whenever a customer showed up where they weren't supposed to be. That's why I usually handled those situations. It was just better for everyone. It was the middle of summer, and we were all suffering through a brutal 110-degree day in the back of the delivery truck we were unloading. Our manager kept popping out of his air-conditioned office every 15 minutes to yell at us to work faster, which wasn't helping anyone's mood. The sweat was pouring down our faces and tensions were running high. That's when we heard it. That dreaded "excuse me" that always meant trouble. I turned around to see this perfectly put together older woman, probably in her 60s or 70s, complete with an immaculate perm and expensive clothes. And she was carrying a leaking milk jug, leaving a trail of white puddles behind her. I politely told her that she couldn't be in this area, explaining that it was an employees-only section. Instead of understanding, she immediately started screaming at me. She ranted about finding an unrefrigerated milk jug in an aisle and claimed she was doing us a favor by bringing it back here, since apparently none of us could do our jobs properly. Her words, not mine. I tried to keep my customer service smile plastered on, even though I could feel my co-worker tensing up beside me. I thanked her for bringing it to our attention, but explained that in the future she should leave it where it is and ask an employee outside of this room for help. She looked at me like I'd just insulted her entire family tree. She called me an ungrateful little jerk, then asked if I wanted the milk back in a tone that should have warned me what was coming. When I agreed to take it, instead of handing it to me, she wound up and threw the milk jug straight at my head. It connected with a wet smack, and milk went everywhere. I stood there in shock, dripping with milk, unable to even process what had just happened. That's when my co-worker snapped. Without a word, he snatched up the milk jug from the floor and hurled it back at her with the precision of a professional athlete. It hit her square in the chest, soaking her expensive outfit. Then he really let loose, calling her a dumb witch and questioning her intelligence. He berated her for throwing milk at someone who was just trying to help, pointed out how she'd tracked milk all through the store just to be a jerk, and told her that if she wanted to do us any favors in the future, she should just stay away. He finished by telling her to get out of our storage area and leave us alone. The entire shipping crew stood there in stunned silence as the woman turned and practically ran away. I expressed my worry about my co-worker getting fired, but he just smiled and assured me it would be fine. He pointed out that there were no cameras back here because the company was too cheap to install them, and he had all of us to back him up and say we had no idea what happened. We all exchanged knowing looks, silently agreeing to stick together on this one. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, a whole parade of managers came marching back, with the milk-soaked Karen leading the charge. She immediately started pointing and screaming that my co-worker was the one who had assaulted her. We all put on our best confused faces. I stepped in and told the managers I had no idea what she was talking about. I explained that I was the only one who spoke to her, that she had brought back a leaking milk jug, and that I had politely asked her to leave the employee area. I suggested they check the cameras if they didn't believe us. The manager told us that while there weren't any cameras in the back, it didn't matter because the woman wasn't supposed to be back there anyway, pointing out the multiple signs posted on the door. The woman completely lost it, screeching incomprehensibly until the managers had to escort her out of the store. They gave us a half-hearted lecture about watching our tone with customers, but that was it. The woman couldn't prove anything, and they trusted me since I was usually the level-headed one who handled customer situations. Later that day, we found out she'd tried to get us all fired by calling corporate, but without any evidence, and with our unified story, nothing came of it. Even better, word got around to other employees about what really happened, and whenever any of us had a bad day dealing with entitled customers, we'd remember the milk incident and share a knowing smile. My father believed that forcing people to pay double or triple the actual cost of their homes through interest payments was nothing short of legalized robbery. I remember him constantly talking about how he wished he could beat these banks at their own game, using contracts and legal loopholes just like they did with their customers. The opportunity finally came during the Asian financial crisis of 1997. At the time, my father had a home loan with a small local bank. When the crisis hit Malaysia hard, the government pushed through legislation requiring larger banks to absorb smaller ones to stabilize the economy. Part of this legislation included something called the One Malaysia Home Loan Policy, which required the bigger banks to send acknowledgement letters to all customers from the smaller banks they were taking over. These customers had to sign and return these letters, either physically or digitally, to confirm they understood their loans were being transferred. Our small bank was bought by one of these large corporations, but here's where it gets interesting. My father never received any acknowledgement letter about the transfer. He knew unofficially that his loan was now under the new big bank's control, but he had never signed anything agreeing to their terms. Fast forward to 2007. My father had saved enough money to pay off the entire principal amount of the loan. He walked into the new bank's branch ready to make the full settlement and be done with it. That's when things got interesting. The bank employee started by informing my father that he would still need to continue paying the interest even with a full settlement. My father questioned this, pointing out that his original contract with the small bank clearly stated he could make a full settlement without additional interest payments. When the employee tried to claim that my father had acknowledged and signed under their bank, he quickly cut her off, stating that he had never received or signed any acknowledgement papers from them. He emphasized that all he had was his original contract with a small bank. The employee attempted to bring up the One Malaysia Home Loan Policy, but my father interrupted again. He explained that the policy required them to send acknowledgement letters about the loan transfer and challenged them to produce his signature accepting their new loan policy. He said until they could do that, his original contract remained valid. The employee and several colleagues spent the next hour frantically searching through files and computer records. Eventually, the bank manager called my father into his office for a discussion. The conversation quickly escalated until their shouting could be heard at the nearby food stalls. The manager insisted that my father needed to understand he must pay the interest, regardless of whether he made a full settlement. In response, my father said he would have to take this matter to the National Bank of Malaysia, suggesting they might be able to help locate his missing signature. The manager's face went pale at this threat. He excused himself to make some phone calls to upper management, disappearing for about 30 minutes. When he returned, his entire demeanor had changed. He told my father that after reviewing the case, they had decided to accept his full settlement without additional interest payments. My father then requested his housing grant be ready within a week, to which the manager nervously agreed. Not only did my father get to keep nearly $60,000 that would have gone to interest payments, but he also forced them to expedite his housing grant paperwork. For a middle-class Malaysian family in 2007, that amount of money was life-changing, equivalent to a decent retirement fund. The bank had no choice but to comply. They knew that if this case went to the National Bank of Malaysia, not only would they lose the interest payments, but they'd also face serious penalties for failing to follow proper loan transfer procedures. The manager would likely lose his job and the bank's reputation would take a massive hit. To this day, my father keeps both the original loan contract and the settlement papers in a special folder. Whenever anyone mentions bank loans, he pulls them out and tells his story with the biggest grin on his face. He may not have changed the banking system, but he sure made one bank pay for their carelessness.